It started as something small, a boy on the street, a man known for his power, a request for 20 pesos, less than $1, and a refusal. There's a reason this moment sparked so much attention, not because of what was said or even what was done, but because of what it made people feel. It tapped into something primal and complex in us, our relationship with power, with pride, with the need to be seen, and maybe, just maybe, with our own forgotten selves. For anyone watching that clip, especially those of us in midlife or beyond, something deeper stirs. It's not just about a wealthy man turning down a small request. It's about how he looked at the boy, what he did after, and how for a brief second, the roles of less than and more than began to blur. In the video, Conor McGregor is approached by a barefoot boy with worn clothes and hungry eyes. The boy doesn't beg. He asks, clearly, calmly, as if he's done this hundreds of times before. 20 pesos, sir. His voice carries that mix of hope and resignation, the kind that comes from being ignored too often. McGregor's first reaction is easy to miss if you don't know what to look for. He refuses, not cruelly but firmly, almost automatically, the way many of us might. We're used to seeing this, requests denied, moments passed, but then something shifts. He doesn't walk away, he pauses, looks back, and what he does next doesn't involve money, it involves presence. Now, for those of us who've lived long enough to have regrets, times we wish we had been more generous, more attentive, more human, this moment stings, because it reminds us how easily we can miss chances to connect, and how often we choose protection over participation. This isn't just about McGregor or the child. It's about us, about the adult who grew up swallowing pride to ask for help, about the parent who wonders if they've done enough, about the human being who has learned, sometimes painfully, that not every act of generosity needs to be financial. What McGregor did after the refusal matters. He saw the boy, not as a nuisance, not as a statistic, but as a fellow human being. He knelt down, he made eye contact, he asked him a question. We don't know what was said, but we saw the shift. A connection was made, and for a world increasingly automated where real attention is scarce, that moment was more valuable than any amount of pesos, because sometimes the most transformative thing we can offer isn't money, it's dignity. At first glance, it looks like a child asking for money, but beneath that simple request lies a deeper human truth. We rarely ask for what we truly need in words, especially when life has taught us that asking often leads to rejection. When that boy asked McGregor for 20 pesos, what he might have been asking for was something many of us long for: to be seen, to be acknowledged, to matter. And that desire doesn't disappear with age. In fact, it deepens. As we grow older, the language of our needs becomes more complex. We stop saying "help me" outright. Instead, we hint. We hope someone notices we're tired, that someone checks in, that someone hears what we don't say, that someone sees the sadness behind our smile or the weight behind our silence. In midlife and beyond, we've learned the cost of asking too much, too directly. We've learned how to package our vulnerability and strength, how to phrase things in ways that feel reasonable. But inside, many of us are still asking for those same 20 pesos, just in more grown-up terms. A little attention, a little grace, a little mercy. McGregor's initial refusal speaks to a shared habit, the automatic dismissal of need, especially when it comes from someone unfamiliar or uncomfortable to us. It's easier to say no. It's safer, especially when the world teaches us to protect what we have, to keep emotional distance, to stay in control. But his pause afterward, that flicker of reconsideration, reminds us of another truth. Sometimes the moment after we say no is when our soul finally speaks. How many times have we dismissed someone only to feel a tug in our chest moments later? A voice whispering, "You could have done more." That voice doesn't accuse, it invites. It calls us back to our better selves, the part that remembers what it felt like to need, to hope, to be overlooked. And that's why this story resonates with so many people over 45. We've been on both sides. We've been the one asking, and we've been the one turning away. But the question is, when was the last time we looked back? The boy in the video may have only been asking for a coin, but life experience tells us he was asking for more. A sign that he mattered, a signal that he wasn't invisible. And in that moment, whether McGregor realized it or not, his second reaction gave the boy something that can't be spent. It gave him recognition. And isn't that in the end what most of us want? Recognition, not just for what we do, but for who we are, for surviving, for trying. For being human in a world that often forgets how to be. By the time we reach a certain age, we've all built a kind of armor. Not the physical kind, but the emotional shields forged from years of disappointment, betrayal, rejection, and silence. Pride becomes one of its strongest pieces. Shame, one of its deepest wounds. Watching that boy ask for money stirred something in many of us, not because we pity him, but because, in some quiet, forgotten moment of our past, we were him. Not necessarily on the street, but emotionally, spiritually, maybe even financially. We remember what it felt like to swallow our pride and ask for help, and to be denied. There's a reason why asking becomes harder as we age. When we were younger, we were allowed to be needy, but somewhere along the way, adulthood taught us to confuse need with weakness. Pride stepped in to protect us, and over time it stopped being just a defense. It became a prison. The boy in the video still had the courage to ask. That in itself is powerful. But for many people watching, especially older men, it triggered a different feeling: shame. The kind of shame that's hard to name, but impossible to ignore. Shame for the times we needed help and didn't get it. Shame for the times we refused to ask. Shame for the times we said no to others, even when we could have said yes. McGregor's initial refusal was perhaps not just a moment of denial, but a mirror. A mirror held up to every viewer who has ever turned away. And for some, the reason that second part of the video was so moving is because we needed to see him come back, to redeem the moment, to give us hope that we too can return to something softer. In midlife, shame often becomes quieter, but more corrosive. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It tells us we're too far gone to change, that we've missed our chance to be better, that whatever kindness we didn't offer or whatever need we ignored, and it's too late, but it's not. What McGregor did after his refusal wasn't just an act of compassion. It was a quiet defiance of that inner voice that says, "You're done. You can't do better." In turning around, he challenged the story we tell ourselves. That pride must always win, and that shame defines who we are. In reality, pride and shame are both masks. What's underneath them is something far more human, the yearning to connect, to restore, to redeem. And maybe that's why this simple street moment touched so many people, because it wasn't really about pesos. It was about the possibility that no matter where we are in life, we can still choose presence over pride, connection over shame, humanity over habit. In a world that often confuses power with dominance, moments of restraint can be revolutionary, especially when they come from someone known for their aggression, their bravado, their control. Conor McGregor built his legacy on being the alpha, a fighter, a performer, a master of the psychological battlefield. That's why his second gesture toward the boy mattered so deeply. It was unexpected. It was quiet. And above all, it was humble. What we witnessed wasn't weakness, it was power, but a different kind. The kind that doesn't need to humiliate to feel strong. The kind that doesn't treat kindness as vulnerability. The kind that so many people over 45 recognize as the power we wish we had learned sooner, the power of grace. There comes a point in adulthood where we start to reevaluate what power really means. In youth, power is loud. It's performance. It's control over others. But as we mature, something shifts. True power begins to look like emotional balance, the ability to choose calm over chaos, to listen instead of react, to give without condescension. And that's why McGregor's gesture, small as it was, holds such symbolic weight. When he turned back and gave the boy attention instead of money, what he offered was respect. That child's poverty didn't make him invisible. McGregor could have kept walking. He could have tossed a coin over his shoulder, never breaking stride. But instead he paused. He turned. He met the boy's eyes. In that act, he did something rare. He showed a form of power that doesn't rely on making someone else smaller. For those of us who've spent decades navigating workplace hierarchies, family roles, gender expectations, and social dynamics, we know how often power has been used to belittle. We've felt the sting of being talked over, dismissed, or pitied. And many of us, if we're honest, have done the same to others. Not out of cruelty, but out of conditioning. That's why a moment like this resonates. It reminds us that power used with dignity is not only possible, it's transformative. Especially for men raised in cultures that equate masculinity with control, this kind of gesture speaks volumes. It says, you don't have to dominate to matter. You don't have to win every moment. You don't have to crush softness to be strong. We live in a time where many people are rethinking what strength looks like. And it's not always in the raw. Sometimes it's in the pause, the soft gaze, the respectful tone, the decision to engage when walking away would be easier. Power that doesn't humiliate. That's the kind of power that heals. And in that brief exchange, we saw a glimpse of it. A fighter who chose presence over performance, a child who stood tall in his ask, and an audience reminded that the strongest thing we can do is to make others feel worthy, without ever making them feel small. In a world obsessed with material worth, it's easy to forget that presence, real, undivided attention, is its own currency. And often it's worth far more than money. When McGregor turned back to that boy, he didn't hand him 20 pesos. He didn't reach into his pocket. What he gave was something far more rare: his time, his attention, his acknowledgement. And in that brief pause, he reminded us all that to be seen is one of the deepest human needs. By the time most people reach midlife, they've spent decades in relationships with partners, children, co-workers, where presence is often taken for granted. You sit at the same table but look at different screens. You talk, but don't really listen. And slowly invisibility sets in, not because no one loves you, but because no one really notices you anymore. That's why the simplicity of that exchange struck a nerve. A global sports icon, used to crowds, noise, chaos, stops to meet the eyes of a child many others would walk past. He didn't give him money, he gave him recognition. Presence, especially from someone who doesn't have to give it, carries a specific kind of weight. And we know this deeply. Think of how it feels when someone powerful pauses just to hear your voice, when someone busy puts down their phone to ask, "How are you really?" In that moment, you're no longer background noise. You become real. And if we're honest, many people over 45 have learned, sometimes painfully, how rare those moments are. We've been in rooms where no one saw us. We've been in families that mistook obligation for connection. We've sat across from people we loved, hoping they'd look up and really see us again. That's why presence, the kind McGregor offered, isn't just about attention. It's about validation. It says, "You exist. I see you. You matter." And let's be clear, this isn't about glorifying a celebrity for doing the bare minimum. It's about holding up a mirror to ourselves and asking, when was the last time I offered someone that kind of presence? Without a reason, without a reward, just because they're human. Sometimes we assume people need money, advice, or solutions, but most of the time what they need is far simpler. A pause, a moment, a sign that they're not invisible. And maybe that's why this story spread. Because deep down we're all tired of being overlooked, and we're all longing to remember that we still have the power to see others. Presence doesn't cost anything, but it changes everything. So the next time someone crosses your path, and whether a child, a stranger, or even someone in your own home, pause, look up. Offer what's been missing in our fast, distracted world. Because the richest people aren't always the ones with the most money. They're the ones who know how to show up. Something powerful happens when we witness an act of compassion. It doesn't just move us emotionally. It reactivates a part of ourselves we may have let go quiet. It calls forth the part of us that wants to care, to help, to engage, even if life has made us hesitant. By midlife, many people have lived through enough emotional bruises to grow cautious. We've given too much and been taken for granted. We've tried to help and been met with silence. We've opened our hearts only to find the world too busy, too distracted, or too hardened to receive it. So we retreat, not into coldness but into self-preservation. We start telling ourselves that compassion is naive, that kindness must be measured, that helping is something best left to someone else. And yet, when we watch a brief moment of human connection, like a fighter softening for a child, something stirs. A memory, a desire, a sense of recognition. It's not just about the boy or McGregor. It's about us and the parts of ourselves we've silenced. The part that still wants to stop and ask someone if they're okay. The part that still believes eye contact can heal. The part that remembers what it was like to need someone to notice and swore we would never let another person feel unseen. This chapter of life after 45 is when many people begin asking deeper questions. Not just about success or legacy, but about who we've become. Are we still kind? Are we still open? Are we still capable of giving without expecting a return? And this is where something as small as a paused gesture can become medicine. McGregor, in that one act, gave permission for many to feel again, to care again, to remember the strength that exists in softness. Compassion isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's the deep understanding that every person is carrying a story, and that sometimes being acknowledged can be more healing than being helped. It's important to say, we're not always in a position to give. Life gets heavy. Resources are limited. But compassion doesn't require perfection. It only asks that we stay human. For some watching that video, the emotional pull wasn't just admiration, it was longing. Longing to feel again, to trust again, to step out from behind the walls life helped us build and say, I'm still here, I still care. And if we've drifted from that version of ourselves, the one who gave freely, felt deeply, loved openly, it's not too late. We can return. We can choose again. We can be the person who turns around. Sometimes we just need a moment to remind us. A boy, a question, a pause, a human being deciding that connection is more powerful than convenience. That's how we reclaim our compassion. We often think legacy is something grand, a name etched in stone, a fortune passed down, a body of work admired by generations. But the older we get, the more we begin to realize it's not the big gestures people remember. It's the quiet moments, the ones that seem small, but stay with us for a lifetime. A child asks for 20 pesos. A man pauses. He sees him. That's it. And yet, it's everything. For those of us in the second half of life, this realization hits with increasing clarity. What we leave behind isn't just what we earned, built, or accomplished. It's how we made others feel. It's whether we looked back when we could have walked away, whether we softened when we could have stayed hard. McGregor's gesture, however brief, planted something in the collective heart of those who watched, not because he gave money or didn't, but because he allowed himself to respond. And that's the invitation we all face now. Will we let ourselves respond? Our lives are made up of thousands of such moments, interactions at gas stations, conversations with our children, eye contact with strangers. Most of them we forget, but some, a very few, become the emotional fingerprints we leave on others. It's easy to think that because we're older, our time to leave a mark has passed. But that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, the older we get, the more powerful these moments become. Why? Because now they're soaked in experience, in contrast, in knowing. We know how it feels to be ignored. We know what it means to struggle, to rebuild, to regret, to hope again. And that knowledge, that emotional maturity, allows us to give in a way that is rare and deeply felt. When we choose to be present, when we choose to be kind, we're not just being nice. We're offering medicine in a world that is starved for soul. And while most of us won't have a viral moment caught on camera, we will have our own moments, unseen but no less meaningful. A hug offered, a harsh word withheld, a seat given, a call returned, a tear noticed. These become the legacy. Not the things we accumulated, but the dignity we protected, the tenderness we allowed. The humanity we chose to preserve in others even when the world told us to stay indifferent. So the next time life gives you a moment, a child, a question, a pause, don't underestimate it. It might just be your greatest act. And long after you're gone, someone might still remember the way you turned back, looked them in the eye and made them feel like they mattered. That, in the end, is the most lasting legacy of all.